The series has been a delightful opportunity to bring writers from all over the world into our nice little cozy space here at the New House for an opportunity to listen to them read, listen to them talk, and to ask questions yourself. So I'm happy to say our host for today's reading is Hilton Alls, who has been in residence here at the New House all year as the New House Visiting Professor of Creative Writing. You probably are familiar with Hilton's work. He's staff writer at the New Yorker, where he began as staff writer in 1994. He's also written articles for the Village Voice, the New York Review of Books, and was editor-at-large at 5. He was awarded a Guggenheim for creative writing in 2000, and has also received the Georgine Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism. The thing I want to say that I really enjoy most about our series here is the moment that takes place after the authors read and before you all get to ask questions, which is the time when Hilton will facilitate a conversation between Tom and Nikky, and we get to eavesdrop on that and find out a little bit more about what makes them tick and how they think about writing. So I'll hand things over to Hilton to introduce our poets and to get things started. Can I remind you to turn off any noise-making devices? And also let you know that there will be books available for sale to be signed after the reading. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm all in favor of poets having more money, so you should buy books right after we finish. I want to thank Carol and Jane Jacobs of the Newhouse Center for helping us gather here today. To have Tom Sleigh and Nikky Finney read from their superlative work this afternoon is an extremely vibrant way to welcome cherry blossom season and the sweetness and sadness of spring. You must forgive my mournful opening tone, but poets can do that to me. They can also turn that mournfulness into a kind of quiet joy in the flick of a line, while inspiring a host of other feelings too. Feelings that I'm loath to share in such august company because I'm very greedy about poets. There are so few of them, relatively speaking, and those who devote their souls to the enterprise live enviable lives. True poets are spiritually disciplined in ways that the rest of us analytical slobs can only look at with a kind of wonder. To fit lines of experience into Villanelle or Sestina requires a patience and freedom that would land many of us in a psychiatric facility. But poets, for the most part, are not crazy. They're just poets, and the madness is in the form. Tom Sleigh, our first reader this afternoon, is a great practitioner of the form because he is that very rare thing, a poet who can make us laugh as he makes us think. Take these lines from his lovely poem, Airport Economy Inn. Out in the hall, someone's pounding on the ice machine, one hand beating rhythm to fuck it, fuck it, fuck it. Reveries of living here year after year, scalloped walls, cottage cheese ceiling, plaster hands praying on the checkout counter, complimentary donuts hoarded in the ice bucket. There, as elsewhere, Sleigh illustrates what alienation looks like to the eye and the soul. In some of his work, he walks a delicate line between the truly heartbreaking and the ridiculous and the possible. Besides publishing his poems in magazines ranging from the Yale Review to the New Yorker, Sleigh has published 8 books of poetry, a book of essays, and a translation of Euripides' Hercules. During that time, these institutions have given him money, which I wish we'd give poets more of. The Guggenheim Foundation, the Lila Wallace Fund, and the National Endowment for the Arts. He presently teaches in the Graduate Creative Writing Program at Hunter College, and I would study with him in 5 minutes if he would have me. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Sleigh.
Hilton?
Oh.
Hilton, that was a great introduction. Anyway, I would have Hilton in 5 minutes, so maybe I will have him in 5 minutes. Anyway, Well, thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to read with Nikky and to be here with Hilton, who's coming back.
It returns.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for that kind of introduction. And
It's all true.
well, yeah, the one thing about it is that is interesting to me is the fact that there are a lot poets are often. Well, he's right. You know, they try to impersonate normal people. So I'll do my best today too. And I want to thank Carol, and I want to thank Jane. Thank you so much for everything you've done. And I'll read. And is this? Okay, it's fine. You know, I think I'll read that poem that Hilton mentioned towards the end there. Okay. I think I'll start with an older poem. When I was a boy, my mother and father had a drive-in movie theater. And so I went to the movies every night. And this was during the Cold War. And one of the things about the Cold War and the kind of movies that were made during that time, they had the grade B science fiction movies, which were kind of a response to paranoia about being invaded by, obviously, the Soviet Union, which existed, but they always took the form of desert atolls having been contaminated by radiation and fallout from the atomic bomb. And so all the flora and the fauna on the islands were of immense size. There was one, my favorite, was of the crabs. They grew to the size of boxcars. Mad scientists would be walking by, and then the crab would dash out and eat the mad scientist, and then another mad scientist would come by. The crab would have gone back into the cave meanwhile, and then the crab would dash out again, but this time he would talk in the voice of the mad scientist. So anyway. I'm just, the thing about the poem is we had an old green Plymouth. My twin brother slept here. I slept there, and my older brother slept on the seat underneath us. And at one point I had to go to the bathroom. And I got lost in the parking lot because the film broke. Newsreading. It was like being in the crosshairs of a magnifying glass, where the beams of the planets concentrating in a death ray, passing right through me, boring a hole between my shoes through the concrete floor all the way to the far side of the earth. Yet it was only not knowing how to get where I was going. I'd gotten lost in the parking lot on the way to the cinder block bunker where my mother worked the snack bar, my father the projector. The drive-in movie screen stretched horizon to horizon. The whole of Texas sprawled around. Cathedral-like DeSotos and great-finned Pontiacs, flickering and sinister in torrents of light flooding down the screen. Frozen in that light, I might have been the disconsolate, ageless, stone-eyed child, ornamenting a pillar in a dead Roman city, high up on a desert plateau. I wasn't even as tall as the speakers mumbling on and on, the way now, in my dream of extreme old age, I hear voices mumbling interminably. Where does it shimmer, my refuge, grotto of my swimming pool, lapping in the infinite leisure of the newsreel? At last my mother appeared from among the cars and led me back to the snack bar, but I still hovered out there, turned loose among the shadows, disembodied passions, striving for mastery above the tensed windshields. There gleams Marilyn Monroe, movie star, enjoying her fame in the voluptuous, eternal present tense of celebrity, being worked over by hands of her masseur. Bougainvillea overgrows her beach bungalow retreat of peace and pleasure. The screen, nothing now, but layer on layer of flesh the fingers knead in a delirious ballet, pushing, pulling, palms slippery and quick, ambiguous instruments of comfort or of pain. The rush of blood to her face, clouds into white light as film stock jerks across a void, half coma blackout, half nightmare aura. The film jammed, raw light pulsing like a bandage on a face wrapped round and round in surgical gauze. Wherever that light took me looms far from candy bars and gum wrappers blazing under glass. The movie poster, Death Ray, stopped the earth revolving. Time had stopped. My mother's black slacks and my father's not yet grown goatee, my own hands shaking nervously about, were silently dissolving in that ray bombarding from beyond the galaxy, being invaded by screeching, beseeching noises of alien beings searching for a planetary home. Then, up there, on the screen, frenetic in the light, was a hair, trembling between two cloven lobes of shadow that were part of the projector's overheating brain, its brilliantly babbling, delusional, possessed by shadows, dispossessed brain. This poem's called Space Station. I'll just follow along with the science fiction motif. And in the poem, I imagine my mother's kitchen is a space station. Maybe not science fiction. If you've been to my mother's kitchen. My mother loves dogs. I like dogs. But dogs are strange creatures, particularly when you lock gazes with them. They look at you and you look at them and you think, I have no idea what you're thinking. Anyway, space stations create gravity by revolving, and this poem takes place when the space station reverses and everything floats in the air. My mother and I and the dog were floating weightless in the kitchen. Silverware hovered above the table. Napkins drifted just below the ceiling. The dead who had been crushed by gravity were free to move about the room, to take their place at supper, lift a fork, knife, spoon. A spoon, knife, fork that, outside this moment's weightlessness, would have been immovable as mountains. My mother and I and the dog were orbiting in the void that follows after happiness of an intimate gesture. Her hand stroking the dog's head, and the dog looking up, expectant, into her eyes. The beast gaze, so direct and alienly concerned to have its stare returned. The human gaze that forgets for a moment that it sees what it's seen and simply, fervently sees, but only for a moment. Only for a moment were my mother and the dog looking at each other, not mother or dog, but that look. I couldn't help but think, if only I were a dog, or mother was, then that intimate gesture, this happiness passing, could last forever. Such a hopeful, hopeless wish I was wishing. I knew it and didn't know it, just as my mother knew she was my mother and didn't. And as for the dog, her large black pupils, fixed on my mother's faintly smiling face, seemed to contain a drop of the void we were all suspended in. Though only a dog who chews a ragged rawhide chew toy shaped into a bone, femur or cannon bone, of the heavy body that we no longer labored to lift against the miles-deep air pressing us to our chairs. The dog pricked her ears, sensing a dead one approaching. Crossing the kitchen, my father was moving with the clumsy gestures of a man in a spacesuit. The strangeness of death moving among the living. Though the world was floating with a lightness that made us feel we were phantoms. I don't know if my mother saw him. He didn't look at her when he too put his hand on the dog's head, and the dog turned its eyes from her stare to his. And then the moment on its axis reversed, the kitchen spun us the other way round and pressed heavy hands down on our shoulders so that my father sank into the carpet. My mother rested her chin on her hand and let her other hand slide off the dog's head. Her knuckles bent in a kind of torment of moonscape erosion, ridging up into peaks, giving way to seamed plains with names like the Sea of Tranquility. Though nothing but a metaphor for how I saw her hand, her empty, still strong hand, dangling all alone in the infinite space between the carpet and the neon-lit ceiling. Now, I'll read a cat poem now. Just quickly, I've been doing some journalism in the last few years, and I went to Lebanon and Syria in 2007 to do an article about Palestinian refugees in the aftermath of the war between Lebanon and Israel. And I had to go to a command post, a CP post, and there was a yard full of tanks, and then there was a cemetery, a Christian cemetery, and then there was a sea, and as I was walking in to get my permission to go further south, there was fighting taking place on the tanks, and they're small tanks, they're not big American tanks, they're small tanks about the size of a horse and cart, in fact. I saw lots of shadows moving, and I thought I was having heat stroke because I was tired, there was a lot of sun, and I realized there were cats, hundreds of them, just. Anyway, the Egyptians have a cat goddess named Bast, who's also called Lady of Flame, Eye of Ra. And then there's an ancient historian who put together a book of military strategies, including ones by what he called barbarians. Of course, he was a Roman who put it together. Poems in 3 parts, army cats. Over by the cemetery, next to the CP, you could see them in wild catnip, going crazy. I watched them roll and wriggle, paw it, lick it, chew it, leap about, pink tongues stuck out, drooling. Cats in the tank's squat shadows lounging, or sleeping curled up under gun turrets. Hundreds of them sniffing or licking long hind legs stuck into the air, great 6-toed brutes fixing you with a feral slit-eyed stare. Everywhere, ears twitching, as the armor plate, expanding in the heat, gave off piercing little pings. Cat invasion of the mind. Cat tribes running wild. And one big pregnant female comes racing through weeds to pounce between the paws of a marble dog crouching on a grave, and sharpens her claws against his beard of moss before she goes all silky, luxuriously squirming right under the dog's jaws and rolls over to expose her swollen belly. Picture her with gold hoop earrings and punked out nose ring like the cat goddess Bast, bronze kittens at her feet, the crowd drinking wildly, women lifting up their skirts as she floats down the Nile, a sistrum jangling in her paw. Then come back out of it and sniff her ointments, Lady of Flame, Eye of Ra. Through the yard, the tanks come gunning, charioteers laughing, goggles smeared with dust and sun, scattering the toms slinking along the blast wall, holding back the waves from washing away white crosses on the graves. The motors roaring through the afternoon like a cat fuck yowling on and on. The gun turrets revolving and the cat's eyes swivel and shine, steel treads clanking, sending the cats flying in an exodus through brown, brittle grass, the stalks barely rippling as they pass. After the last car bomb killed 3 soldiers, The Army website labeled them martyrs. 4 civilians killed at checkpoints, 3 on the airport road. A young woman blown up by a grenade. Facts and more facts, until the dead ones climb up out of the graves, gashes on faces, or faces blown away like sandblasted stone, that in the boarded up museum's fractured English leaves the onlooker riddled and shaken, nothing but a pathetic gaping. And then I remember the ancient archers frozen between reverence and necessity, who stare down the enemy, barbarians, as it's told, who nailed sacred cats to their shields, knowing their foes, outraged in their piety, would throw down their bows and wail like kittens. Different kind of war. I'm a recovering high school football player, and I have a twin brother, and my twin brother and I were linemen, which means you get to smash into people within the rules, which is basically what football is. Exactly. Or sex. More fun that way. Yeah, I discovered that later. And anyway, the coach called us out once and said, I want you boys to do a drill in front of the rest of the team. And then he blew the whistle, and then he didn't blow the whistle for another 90 seconds. It's a long time to smash into your twin brother. And then the only other thing about this poem, anybody here remember Joe Pine? Joe Pine was the talk show host. I watched him in LA. He had really, his whole mode was to invite somebody on. Some guy had written a book called How to Get Rich, and the first thing he would say was, well, if you're so rich, how come you'd be on my show? And it would go downhill from there. And there's a very famous exchange, I don't know if it's true or not, that happened between him and Frank Zappa. He had Zappa on the show. And Joe Pine had a wooden leg. He did. Self-portrait with shoulder pads. Brother fighting brother, and the loser driven out. My eyes were on Tim's eyes, off someplace, gone from his body. While under his jersey, the shoulder pads gleam brighter. Masculine yoke we both labor under, determined not to get knocked flat. Smashing and smashing into each other, helmets blankly ringing to the whole team screaming in time to the drill, Timmy, hit Tommy, Tommy, hit Timmy. Until, exhausted, we fall to our knees and still coach refuses to blow the whistle so that we, on our knees, keep ramming into each other. Implacable, servile, our hearts too violent not to play inside the rules. How we envied the hippies on the Joe Pine show. Pine sneering to Frank Zappa, so, I guess your long hair makes you a woman. Zappa shooting back, I guess your wooden leg makes you a table. White as calcium, white as moons brought down into swamp water, white as a cataract on a blind eye, the pads fuse onto shoulder bones to make us walk that athletic walk of power and glory and terror of shame. So Tommy hitting Timmy and Timmy hitting Tommy takes over mind and body in the zone until coach blows the whistle and we get up off our knees and turn to avoid each other's faces. Years later, brought down by gun flash insights of assassination and business frowns of gangbangers dividing up junk while police held the line in riot masks and shields, I prayed for the cup to pass. But either way, I was an ass and had to carry my ass's load as far as an ass could. I'll just read 2 more poems. read that poem Hilton mentioned. For many years, I commuted to a job, and I stayed at a place called the Airport Economy Inn, which I absolutely loved. Airport Economy Inn. No one speaking, nothing moving, except for the way the snow keeps falling. It's falling a kind of talking in the dark, while all across the valley we keep on sleeping in the separate conditions of our dreaming. His face all overgrown with concern, the newsman's mouth says whatever it's saying, explosions going off, sound turned down, wind ripping at some twanging strip of metal. My friend's voice keeps murmuring in my head, murmuring she's stressed by going out with 2-minute once, worrying they'll cross and she'll lose them both. She's starting to drink and smoke too much, loves making her a liar, a chimney head, an alkie. No one speaking, nothing moving but snow falling, falling. Bearing this motel with its takeout menu, New Standard Bible, checkout time, 11 a.m., smiley face envelope to leave the maid a tip. Out in the hall, someone's pounding on the ice machine, one hand beating rhythm to fuck it, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it. Reveries of living here, year after year, scalloped walls, cottage cheese ceiling, plaster hands praying on the checkout counter, complimentary donuts hoarded in the ice bucket, do not disturb, credit card imprint, room 401's one of our regulars. Food, God, death, money, a TV clicker to push the world back and bring it closer, fantasies of lust, so ridiculous and charmed, you need 2 king beds and a mirrored ceiling. No one speaking, nothing moving, but for the screen lighting up with bombs falling through shifting fortunes of the soldier on a stretcher, body gone limp, lost in glare spilling off a Humvee's side that keeps hearse-like pace with the stretcher moving above the stretcher's shadow. No one speaking, nothing moving. My eyes close, I drift and doze, dissolving to jags, chunks, splinters, flake piling on flake, erasing diamond-cut angles of every crystal swirling through streetlight before fading back into parking lot gloom as these lines stretch out and return to the margin as if nothing can stop this pattern from repeating, words telling it in irregular shifts of rhythm while the crawl keeps crawling at the bottom of the screen. And here's the last poem. It's called Bedtime Story. And, anyway, there'll be 2 cats and 1 dog. I have incredibly boring dreams. In my dreams, I'm thirsty. I go up to the sink. I get a glass of water and I drink it. I got the first line from a dream, so I decided to run with it. The infamy of America Bank is closing. My cat is the officer who closed it. All she did was walk across the table, jump down onto the floor, and the market crashed all the way to the underworld. And down there in those dark economies, among the hard cash of the dead, in the dense electrical crackle of her fur, my cat grows huge inside her purring, her eyes not the color of money, but of fog. And in that fog, see her pouncing on a soul, helpless as a vole, she grips in her jaws, its fur stinking in that acrid way of dead leaves, mud, oil-slicked gutters. The infamy of America Bank has been brought down by one swipe of her paw, by her irises dilating to the pupil's rim. And now She leaps back up from the underworld, stalks across my bed, butts her head against my head, yowling in that half-strangled way for me to take her prey until her jaws open and the soul, bleeding, crawls away. How slowly she retracts her claws, how slowly pushes them out, so I feel the lightest prick, cool from the night hunting, on my cheek. And I feel myself falling asleep under her paw. All the nations of the earth falling asleep. Thank you.
That's terrific. Next person is Nikky Finney, and I'm just going to start with a little personal reminiscence. The first evening I spent drinking with Nikky was in Northampton, Massachusetts, and this was a number of years ago. Oh, we did. And a number of years ago, a beautiful early fall night, and we looked up at the moon and quoted from two poems we loved, Derek Wolcott's Jean Rhys and Marion Moore's Marriage. After that particular recitation, I was in love with a poet whose particular vision, as in Yeats's a vision, has everything to do with the external world as it's affected by our ability to travel emotionally and intellectually in different spheres, all at the same time. And that was Nikky Finney. In retrospect, our quoting Moore and Wolcott wasn't such an unusual choice for either of us to make. Nikky and I share a love and reality of strong women who have lived in a world that generally takes issue with who they are. Indeed, contemporary life is replete with a certain sadness. It teaches women, or more specifically, American women, how to cordon off those aspects of themselves, wit, critical distance, their bodies, that interrupt the flow of the status quo and their conversation. Standing at life's party, men who want to be just that, and the women who believe them, often ask singular women, you want to say what, and do what, and why exactly? Nikky throws these questions back at her presumed interlocutors, mouths that talk without thinking. During the 2 years we spent at Smith, I was often embarrassed to be in Nikky's presence. The reasons for this were manifold. First, there was her beauty. It exposes all pretense with a glance. And then there were her poems, collected in three previous volumes, which articulated the dishonesty in the room at large. But I think the thing that embarrassed me most was that Nikky was becoming something else entirely at Smith, a new or different kind of writer than she had been before. At Smith, she was creating a new form, cinematic poems, movies starring women as diverse as Rosa Parks and Condoleezza Rice, all united by the poet's eye. Nikky was raw and making herself available to her own vulnerabilities and truths. This we ended up seeing in her National Book Award-winning collection, Head Off Split. The book is filled with what Hemingway once called the true sentence. Nikky Finney.
Men who give milk. Epigraph. Breast development occurs commonly and spontaneous lactation occasionally in men under conditions of starvation. Discover Magazine, February 1995. In Toronto, there is a man with Wole Soyinka hair walking one way. A giant garbage bag bobbles in his arms. Now and then he looks another way, behind where another bag sits. He does not turn for it, not then. Instead, he pays attention to his future, walking all the way ahead. Down the street he goes tipping, a tightrope walker's agility. His bag, as bulbous as a giant's eye, cannot help him see. People with steaming cups and toasted breads push to not be in his way. His whole wide world is on the move. I keep one eye on him and his moving bag. The other eye is kept on the bag of his corner past. He reaches the end of the street, sits the bag in his arms down on the corner, gentles it as if it is a sack of the last time he heard the high yellow and coral orange of his mother's laugh, before, when his world had a lock, a key, a ceiling, a proper place for her to cup his lion-eyed face. As he leaves, he pats the bag on its belly, U-turns, walks 2 blocks back to the other bag, squats, picks that bag up, turns forward, again, once again, walking. His walk is strong as if he has children, 3, 1 wife to love until the end, a 30-year mortgage, a niggling boss, keep your shiny quarters. His feet sing out to the bread pushers. He does not stop at the first corner or the second corner with his first bag. He walks beyond into his future to the 3rd corner, where he sits the bag in his arms, the bag of his dreams, down. He settles his hand on this bag's spine, as if it is that day in the country with his father when it was about to rain. This is how to shift and glide, the old man says. The old 4-speed truck lurches like a bullfrog. 2 hours of repeat instruction, and the old man finally reaches for the boy's temple. His hand, an onyx butterfly, landing on a purple bush, it both fears and fancies. This is the first time his father has ever touched him. The boy is able parking between 2 old oaks, laying down the sure, smooth tracks of the man-to-be. The walking man, with hair like Wole Soyinka, stands and turns away from this noonday flash of the ephemeral. He goes back for the sunshine bag that is fat with his laughing mother, who is always reaching, even now, for his browning and walking face. He walks it to the corner, beyond the bag spilling with his finally satisfied father, and his satisfied father's finally soaring butterflies. This picking up and putting down, this serpentine stepping goes on until the sun gives up, raises its red-orange hand, going to work now in some other hemisphere. All day, all week, the pendant, then crescent, then waning whole winter moon pours. With every step, his feet stitch, then unbraid. The woolly strings of his heart keep moving. His 2 bags never meet on the same corner. Everything now out of his reach is never out of his arms for long. In Toronto, a man zigzags his way across Canada. In Canada, a black man stitches himself back to earth. I was in the theater watching the March of the Penguins, and I had a flash of a moment with my mother that became this poem called Penguin Moment Bread. She pulls white oily meat of mullet off the long sharp bones of spine. The bones prick. She never once says ouch. I watch her fingers, 7 inches away. My eyes are 2 glossy olives glued to the delicate woman's mouth. It is summer. Behind her, the white curtains she has made move like seagrass. I am camera. She is movie. She bites, then rolls, placing plump, soft chunks of fish into the side of her mouth. Her eyes grow big from what she tastes. I study her mouth, not her eyes. She chews slowly, never showing what's there. Her tongue twists and falls. My dinner moves in slow whitefish animation. She coos like a woman who can taste any flavor in the world, a woman who can hula hoop in her own mouth. My hand rises, my fingers reach, fall short, then fall again. I want to say, Mama, pull the flesh from the throat, not the belly. The meat there has more juice than the meat around the fins. But she is the mama. I have no baby patois. For what little I know of watery things, I have only 17 months of new desire and only 2 ways of showing it. It's too soon to tell her how much I miss my private swimming hole that by the size 6 looks of her has all but dried up. She chews down on the flesh of the fish, packs it around good until it is a perfect caramel mush. Catching some of the juice that falls with her longest finger there at the corner of her mouth, she pushes all the sweet flesh back inside. Once or twice, she pulls out a hat-pin-sized bone hiding in the waves of tender meat. Only then does she wear her eureka smile, holding it up in the air to show my wishful eyes rise. Her long hand is circled in light. My body shifts into question mark, grateful. My newish eyes lift over and beyond the white curtains that all visitors believe are store-bought. This, she says, is why you have a mama. Her empire backbone finally speaks. This is why you must never talk back to me. Why you must love, honor, obey. My job, her toes pas de deux, is to feed and tell you the stories and keep you away from sharp things that might slip into your throat and never completely disappear. Her eyes plie into the slinky circles of her mouth. The sweet flesh is finally ground. Salt and snapper, spit and meal are a fine pate. She reaches her long brown fingers deep inside her jaw. Our hinged mouths open, mine prematurely. My fists are flying fleshy verbs in the apple air of her kitchen, balled in sweet anticipation. Chubby legs yoga extend into early orgasmic pose. My chin sets downward, facing dog. My begging eyes and dark mauve lips close in slow around her fingers. The pounded succulent fish and spit lands on the center of my tongue. I swell in my first chair ever, fed by the mother who relishes the story of turning her back and leaving me once, to swim off 1,000 miles, find food, fight off shimmering shark, then swim 1,000 miles back, just to drop her beak into mine. I am the lucky girl of the high chair. The clitoris is 9 centimeters deep in the pelvis, most of it scrunched and hidden. New studies show the shy curl to be longer than the penis, but like Africa, the continent, it is never drawn to size. Map makers and others who draw important things for a living do not want us to know this. In some females, the clitoris stretches, unfurls 8 inches, with 2 to 3.5 inches shaft-free outside the body. The longest clitoris of record has been found in the blue whale. In water, desire can rise, honor sea levels, ignore landlocked cartographers. In water, desire refuses retreat. Cattails. One woman drives across 5 states just to see her. The woman being driven to has no idea anyone's headed her way. The driving woman crosses 3 bridges and 7 lakes just to get to her door. She stops along the highway, wades into the soggy ground, cuts down coral-eyed cattails, carries them to her car as if they might be sherbet orange, long-stemmed Confederate roses, sheared for Sherman himself. For 2 days, she drives toward the woman in Kentucky, sleeping in rest areas with her seat lowered all the way back, doors locked. When she reaches the state line, it's misting. The tired, pedal-to-the-metal woman finally calls ahead. "I'm here," she says. "Who's this?" The woman being driven to, who has never checked her oil, asks. The driving woman reminds her of the recent writing workshop where they shared love for all things out of doors and lyrical. "Come, have lunch with me," the driving woman invites. They eat spinach salads with different kinds of dressing. They talk about driving, the third thing they both love, and how fast clouds can change from state line to state line. The didn't know she was coming woman stares at she who has just arrived. She tries to read the mighty spinach leaves in her bowl, privately marveling at the driving woman's muscle spontaneity. She can hardly believe this almost stranger has made it across 5 states just to have lunch with her. She wonders where this mad driving woman will sleep tonight. She is of 2 driving minds, one convertible, one hardtop. The driving woman shows her pictures of her children. Beautiful, the other does not say. Before long, words run out of petrol. The woman who is home, but without pictures of her own, announces she must go. The driving woman frets and flames. "May I walk you to your car?" They walk. The driver changes 2 lanes in 3rd gear, fast. The trunk opens. The Mario Andretti look-alike fills the other woman's arms with sable-sheared cattails, 5 feet high and badly in need of sunlight, and proudly stolen from across 5 states. The woman with no children of her own pulls their 20 pounds in close, resting them over her Peter Panning heart. Her lungs empty out, then fill again with the surge of birth and surprise. For 2 years, until their velvet bodies begin and end to fall to pieces, every time the driven-to woman passes the bouquet of them there in the vase by the front door, she is reminded of what falling in love without permission smells like. Each time she reaches for her keys, she recalls what you must be willing to turn into for love. Spiny oyster mushroom, damson, salt marsh, cedar, creosote, new bud of pomegranate, Aegean sage blue sea, fig, blueberry, marigold, leaf fall, dusty miller, thief of the night. Last poem. Left. Epigraph. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Rudyard Kipling, A Counting Out Song. In Land and Sea Tales for Scouts and Guides, 1923. The woman with cheerleading legs has been left for dead. She hot paces a roof 4 days, 3 nights. Her leaping fingers, helium arms, rise and fall, pointing, pulling at the week old baby in the bassinet, pointing, pulling to the 82-year-old grandmother, fanning and raspy in the New Orleans Saints folding chair. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. 3 times a day, the helicopter flies by in a low crawl. The grandmother insists on not being helpless, so she waves a white handkerchief that she puts on and takes off her head toward the cameraman and the pilot, who remembers well the art of his mirrored-eyed posture in his low-flying helicopter. Bong song, dong ha, Pleku Churai. He makes a slow Viet Cong dip and dive, a move known in rescue as the observation pass. The roof is surrounded by broken levee water. The people are dark, but not broken, starving, abandoned, dehydrated, brown and cumulus, but not broken. The 400-year-old anniversary of observation begins again. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch up. The woman with pom-pom legs waves her uneven homemade sign. It reads, please, help, please. And even if the E has been left off of the please, do you know simply by looking at her that it has been left off because she can't spell and therefore is not worth saving? Or was it because the water was rising so fast there wasn't time? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch up. The low-flying helicopter does not know the answer. It catches all of this on patriotic tape, but does not land and does not drop dictionary or ladder. Regulations require an E be at the end of any please before any national response can be taken. Therefore, it takes 4 days before the National Council of Observers will consider dropping 1 bottle of water or 1 case of dehydrated baby formula on the roof where the E has rolled off into the flood, but obviously not splashed loud enough. But 4 days later, not the mother, not the baby girl, but the determined hanky waver, whom they were both named for, has now been covered up with a green plastic window awning pushed to the side, right where the missing E was last seen. My mother said to pick the very best one. What else would you call it, Mr. Every Child Left Behind? Anyone you know ever left off or put on an E by mistake? Potato, potato. In the future, observation helicopters will leave the well-observed South and fly in Kanye West was finally ripe formation. They will arrive over burning San Diego. The fires there will be put out so well. The people there will wait in a civilized manner. They will receive foie gras and free massage for all their trouble, while their houses don't flood, but instead burn calmly to the ground. The grandmothers were right about everything. People who outlived bullwhips and Bull Connor, historically afraid of water and routinely fed to crocodiles, left in the sun on the sticky tar heat of roofs to roast like pigs, surrounded by 40 feet of churning water in the summer of 2005, while the richest country in the world played the old observation game, studied the situation, wondered by committee what to do, counted in private by long historical division, speculated whether or not some people are surely born ready, accustomed to flood, famine, fear. My mother said to pick the very best one, and you are not it. After all, it was only Poe New Orleans, old bastard city of funny spellers, non-swimmers with squeeze-box accordion accents, who would be left alive to care.
Most other forms of literature, and I've always wanted to, I have a great deal of envy about poets because it's such a singular occupation, and I always wonder and interested in talking to poets about how they became themselves. It's so akin to singing for me, and I wondered if either of you ever had any aspirations to actually perform as singers or musicians before you started writing.
No.
Okay.
my mother is a beautiful voice, and she
Yeah.
sang in the
I
house,
remember you
on
telling
the
me that.
kitchen, and all up through the house, and I would poorly imitate her, you know, like very much in the shadow of her big, strong, lovely arias and church music and all kinds of things. So I didn't have that gift. But what I do think happened is my mother and my family and my community made me incredibly aware of the way things, the sound of things. And because I was an incredibly hypersensitive child, she would tell me, you're hypersensitive, and I would think it was kind of not a good thing. But as a poet, I think it's a very good thing. And I would keep those, you know, those sounds, and I would leave the house and go for a walk, and I would imitate, you know, what that sounded like. But you start off talking about oral, not the oral, but the oral.
Right.
And that is, to me, why I keep doing this, is because I hear the music of the words.
You know, much like Nikky, my mother was a musician too, and she played the piano, and she actually made her way through college. Just shortly before World War II, by playing in a dance band. She played the piano and she sang, and she told me she played in her group was called Rosie and Her Four Thorns. Yeah, it was. And then they played in a place she called, I remember she told me this was called Bloody Bucket. It was Kansas, it was in Kansas, and it was
I was
after.
about to ask where was she?
Yeah, no, it was.
You were raised there?
No, she was raised there, but I was raised in equally out the way, like Texas and Texarkana. And so I grew up with music in the house, and then the other, really, when I really think about it, it's interesting Nikky saying that, you know, speech being foregrounded among in her community. The way in which speech was foregrounded for me was that, well, first of all, my mother talked a lot. She was very voluble. My father was very quiet. So my mother's way of expressing herself was a lot like the Bloody Bucket. It was
I
a
had
reason.
the opposite experience, actually. My father was the big
He was a big
talker.
talker.
My mother, to this day, my sisters will say, my mother's been dead for 25 years, they'll say, you know, Mommy, she doesn't say much. But what she says,
Yeah.
Yeah.
clunks.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
It's not with talk.
Yeah.
So I think that for me it was, you know, being between these two poles, the quiet and the voluble, and then also the other thing I really distinctly remember from my childhood, which the oral became central, was going to the drive-in movies. Because in those days you listen to it through the speaker, to the radio, you listen to it through a speaker, and I always remember thinking of looking at the speaker that would talk at you.
Yeah.
And it was always like this metal face, which had a lot to say, and the voices were always a completely other world. What I was used to in daily life in Texas, out in Texarkana, it's tiny town. And so it was like this other universe of speech. And that worked its way into my dreams, really. And I remember very distinctly thinking, I never saw a movie all the way through, but the movie music would play, which was another kind of experience. And then the voices would start, and they would talk. And they would mix in with my dreams, and I remember very distinctly that they told you things that you weren't supposed to be aware of during the daytime. Like those weird noises going on in mother and father's bedroom, for example. So there was a lot of, speech was speech, and sound and noises had a lot of mystery to it.
And also, one of the things that you pointed out very interestingly, and sometimes that comes, that happens in your poetry, is that division, and I won't call it opposites because I don't think that there are many opposites in the world, but the division between silence and volubility. And one of the things that you talk about continually in your work is, and I think that this is the poet's work, is where to leave space. Space for the reader to insert his or her imagination in the song of the poem. And I was curious about this idea of learning as a non-poet, how poets go about their education. Tell me something about your reading habits, because I know, Nikky, your grandmother used to say you have to go outside because you read so much.
Yeah.
And she used to say you have to put that down and be in the world.
Yeah, put the book down. She would make me, my grandparents had a 100-acre
Can you tell
farm.
where this is? I'm sorry.
Yeah, in top of the state in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I would spend my summers with her, and my grandfather as well. My grandfather was always in the fields.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother was at home. Yeah.
It's just like my past.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But I always had a book under my arm.
Mm-hmm.
And she would pull it out and we would have a little tug. And I'd put it down and she would say, you have to know more than what is in that book. And you have to go out and you have to watch the bees and go out and smell the corn and get your feet dirty and, you know, and learn to talk to the, you know, the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And this is good, but you've got to be able to have some common sense about you. And so I was so, she was my buddy, and I was her oldest granddaughter. So I got all of her good stuff. All the other grandchildren just got, you know, here and there, but I got everything. And because I was the one who was supposed to take care of her down the line.
Yes.
So she was, you know, but yes.
She was teaching you.
She was teaching me to do that, and I would go to the top of the barn, and my uncle had just come back from Vietnam, and there was a trunk of amazing camera equipment, and one of the ways I teach writing is to talk about photography and the different lenses. And I would look at, you know, the back of a bee with a telephoto lens, and I'd pull it back, and I'd go, whoa! And then I would, you know, take the wide angle. He had underwater lenses, and so when we're talking about writing, sometimes I use camera lenses to talk about, do you need a telephoto? Do you need a wide angle? Do you need a gauzy lens on that thing you're writing? And so it makes sense because it's concrete, it's something that students can understand. So yes, I was thrown out into the world of, you know, smells and tastes and the natural world and the cow pasture and the Indian ground and all of that. And then I could come back and read some more.
And one of the things that you raised, and that's such a strong component in your work, is the natural world. And I realized that in my self-education as a writer, one of the huge gaps was I didn't know anything about what a cloud was, or if you're reading a cloud, what is that, or what the earth actually has to say. So I had to very humbly go to people like Darwin and start to read, because I grew up in the city. So one of the things that is so powerful in your work, Nikky, is this communication that you have with the natural world. Tell me a little bit more, and this time I'm going to ask you the same question, about the specific authors that you were attracted to and why.
I can't even explain to you my connection to animals and to the natural world to this day. It's beyond the pale, and actually the next work will come out of that, I think. But you know, I was born right by the ocean. That's one thing that really taints me in the best way.
Where is that?
At Atlantic Beach, Conway, South Carolina. We didn't have parks, we had the shore to walk. So I became very closely related spiritually to the ocean. And so when Jacques Cousteau went under the water, oh my God, the world flipped.
Yes.
You know, I was running home at the end of the day to sit in front of the TV to watch that thing go under and see what, because I'd never seen under. I'd seen over, never seen under.
Yes.
And so Jacques Cousteau or anybody talk, when I got older, Rachel Carson.
Yes.
I mean, just, you know, environmental writing and how do we save this planet and how do we, you know, toxicity, you know, Wendell Berry, you know, and now, you know, so it's all been a continuum. But anybody writing about the human connection to the animal world, to the flowers and fauna, all of that had my complete botany, science class, all of that was a part of my spirit, and I didn't quite know what to do with it because black girls weren't supposed to like those kinds of things in the South at that time.
Because that was field work?
That was field work.
Yeah.
That was like, go on to the city and do something else, but that was where my spirit soared, and it's
Yes. Tom, tell me about experiences?
Well, when Nikki was talking about her grandmother, say,
Reading.
yeah, get out of the house, because, I mean, I had exactly the same experience with my grandfather. He was a Kansas wheat farmer. And I don't think he was quite as, I know, essentially your grandmother was, at least she kind of respected the reading.
Right.
Yeah. My grandfather was pretty skeptical about reading because he wanted me to be out on the tractor, and which I spent a lot of time out on the tractor. I went there for summers in the same way that you did, and so I remember the first time he said, "Okay, now you're gonna plow," and I learned to plow like my mother did. My mother started plowing when she was 10, and I learned when I was about 12. And I could plow a straight furrow. And in those days, you didn't have the tractors they have now are these kind of techno Taj Mahals. You can play, or AC. You can play whatever your favorite band is at full volume. I mean, in those days, it was an umbrella and it was a burlap jacket with iced tea. And it was. So I wanted to read to get out of the sun. Plus, it was a noisy household, like I said, and the book was quiet. And the book didn't yell at you, and didn't wake you up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you could sit there and the voices could talk to you. It was a very intimate experience, and there could be a lot of chaos and loud noise going on in the house, but the book, and when you were done with it, when you had enough of the book, you could close it. And it was a really deep experience of like, I control this. This is deeply pleasurable, that there's one place in my life which I can control, and that's reading. And that turned into, like Nikki, I also had a deep love of the natural world too. I mean, because I grew up in Texas, in Texarkana, then in Utah, and the Rocky Mountains high up there. And all those stuff I just took for granted, you know what I mean? I lived inside it. And then when I finally moved to California, I became a surfer. As much for the drugs as the surfing, honestly. But the other thing too, the other side of that was my mother was a huge reader. And I remember being a little boy in Utah and going into her bedroom, and she wore wigs in those days, because that was something that, she was a high school teacher.
Yes.
So she could have a short
of perfection.
Yeah, she could put the wig on, but it was weird because she didn't wear the wig in the house, so you had the styrofoam heads.
Yes.
There were 4 of them.
Yes.
And there were hat pins in them. You could take the hat pins out and stick them in the nose. It was obviously a lot of deep shit going on, as a friend of mine would say.
Yes. And
so I remember going in there once, and she was reading. Because she was taking classes, she was reading Walden. And she began to read the section out of the Antwerp to me. And I was something like 9 years old. And if you haven't read the Antwerp in a long time, it's the most graphic depiction of war I have ever read. Right down to the point you have a red ant and a black ant, and the red ant is still chewing on the head of the black ant, even though the red ant's body has been detached. And it's written with this kind of macabre sense of humor at the same time. Anyway, my mother was reading it, she read it out loud to me, and she had such pleasure in the reading of it. She was a completely different person. She immediately went from being, mom into the category of weirdo.
Right.
And
because she was narrating something
and she knew
that was
something.
outside of your world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was so envious.
Yes.
And I thought, I want to know this, because I want access to whatever she's feeling right now.
Wow.
And it was a really, and so books were 2 things. They were like a way to get inside what my mother was feeling at that moment, when she was like outside of the family. And then it was a place where there was solace and control and wanted it.
But that's very interesting when you talk about the ways in which people are transformed by reading a parent or a friend. The voices that you guys heard as kids and adolescents ended up in your poetry, because the poems are so much about speaking, whether through the eye of the poet or the character that you're writing about. So there's this kind of fantastic melding of fact and fiction that can happen in poetry very sort of seamlessly, and often in Nikky's case, and especially in the new book, cinematically. What are the other influences do you think have come to bear? I know you've spoken very well and written about cinema, that sort of fractured element of sound and image and being sort of important to you as a writer. Nikky, what other points of reference do you think there were for you?
You know, I was listening to, I mentioned Wendell Berry's name because I heard this amazing hour-long interview with him on NPR like 2 days ago. I don't know if everybody heard it. He was talking about, I'm a farmer, and I write about farming. That's been going through my head for like 48 hours. I write about where I've been and what I've done and what I've seen out, you know, in my little world, in my bigger world. That's important to me, maybe in the way that, you know, the great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz says, I'm trying to save something. You know, he was trying to save his 5th grade school teacher's beehive hairdo. Because he knew it wasn't going to be there. In memory, you know. I have always been like that as the girl with the 10-year-old girl with the little notebook stuck in her overalls or her back pocket. I was taking notes on the world. If I was out in the field, I was writing down. I didn't know I was writing to save it, but I have a deep longing for, I mean, a maudlin almost. I don't like when things end that shouldn't end. And I'm always trying to like take notes about, okay, wait, what's my job here? To like take the most precise cinematic, visual representation, sensory representation of this. Because if it goes away, it's going to be, we won't be who we are if we lose polar bears. We won't. You know, and so I've got to do my job as a writer and a poet. And I've done that since I was 10. And I have 200 notebooks of just my notes on the world from my little perspective. And so everything I've been in, like my grandfather slaughtering a pig, I'll never forget the sound the first time I heard that and how it made me run off into the woods. Terrified me because it sounded like a person. My brothers were there. They have no memory of this. So it's like children aren't the same. I remember that because it had something to do with my soul. My brother forgot it, maybe for the same reason, I don't know. So I was always taking notes. I got my little notebook on the plane and I'm taking notes about something that happened, you know, that two seats over on the plane. And so I don't know if it'll become a poem, but it's my job to sort of catch it in case, just in case.
To pin the ephemeral. Sort of like, you know, as the butterfly is dying.
Well, you know, you brought up Yeats, and Yeats said, as the thing goes away, the revealing happened as the thing goes away. I believe that.
I believe it too. And do you know that, you guys know the beautiful Derek Walcott poem, The Hotel Normandy Pool, and he's sitting by the pool and he's looking at the water evaporating, and he says, I wish this poem would evaporate in the way that the water evaporates, and that it would just be in the atmosphere. And I think that this is the egolessness of the poet, that I think the prose writer has a different kind of ego, which is to sort of make a solid. The poet's impulse, it seems to me, has always been to share the ephemeral and to know that it's going to exist through talking or behavior of someone else, that you're passing along to someone. So, Tom, I wanted to say that the image that you have of your mother, and then she was reading aloud to you, so you're dealing with the shockingness of the adult who pretends to look a certain way, and then a mother who is a certain way being someone else. These are the dichotomy of all of these things are, or Nikky dealing with things that go away and the permanence. We're always, I think, poets in particular are dealing with schisms constantly. And the schisms that I find in both of your books, in particular, I find very comforting because it's the trueness of existence as opposed to the fiction of existence. I think there's yes and no constantly going on in your work. So I want to thank you both for that, and I'll open the floor to questions other than my own. Does anyone have any thoughts or feelings that they would like to share? I hope you do.
Don't be shy.
Don't. Here's a big.
No, this is just a little trivial thing. Do cats really have 6 toes? I noticed that 6-toed cat reference. I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
They do that?
They do. A certain, they have 6 toes if it's the kind of gene pool they all interbreed. I was surprised to find they have them in Provincetown. And then there I was in, in Lebanon. All these little cats with 6 toes. And it's like, what is this?
And when did you start? When did you start reporting, Tom?
About back in 2007. I mean,
Are you enjoying it?
well, I was there in the middle of a war.
No. I mean, are you enjoying the process?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, yeah.
Not the war.
Yeah. No, I love it because it's all about. You're talking about schism,
Mm-hmm.
and as a writer, there's all this. You're listening. You're both looking and you're hearing at the same time, and you're trying to bring those two impulses together. When I'm out in the fields, I'm just taking notes and asking questions. And that's it. I was just in October. I was telling Carol this. I was just doing an article about Somali refugees, and so I was in Kenya, and then up in Mogadishu. Because of the famine there, and I was going to IDP, internally displaced people's camps. And it's an odd thing, before you go, you're scared. But when you're there, you're not scared. And it's a lot different than being a writer. And I have to say, you're so outward. Everything is completely directed outwards towards others in order to make a connection in the moment. And so I loved the connection that you forge, and later on you have to sit back and judge it and try to figure out what it meant.
Or yes, and put it in sort of a context.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're having the experience twice, basically.
You are, yeah. And I mean, if you're going to do it responsibly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway, anyway, doing that kind of thing has really opened me up in lots of ways in the last few years. So I do enjoy it. Yeah.
In this new book, Head Off and Split, which.
Don't
But
forget my ampersand.
I'm sorry, I forgot it for 1 second. But there's a kind of beautiful, begins with this beautiful memoir / poem about being the good girl. Your mother says, do this and be sure to get the fish and so on. Would you ever consider working in the memoir form, Nikky?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I love it. And I find that in all the books I've written, there's always a little bit or a lot, depending on the book. So
Would you ever do it just as a
form?
thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I really want to encourage everyone to read both of these wonderful writers, but please speak. Yes. Speak.
So this has to do with strong emotion. And before you said that, I was thinking, because of what you said about the war zones, about fear, and you write about different war zones, and I think of anger, and so, the question has something to do with this, how to process that anger in a way that goes beyond fear, that goes beyond not destroying yourself and others, but into something that in fact is both teaching and nurturing.
Right.
So if there's a question in there,
We'll have them how to transform that.
Well, no one wants to read anger. No one wants, I don't want to write it. Just, spew anger, stand on a, I'm certainly, that's not what a poet does. It's not what art is. It's not interesting. And the seats would be all empty if that's what I would I think. So I remember I grew up in the 70s and there was a lot of anger around me. And I remember saying clearly, I was 14, 15, and I was like, I do not want to do that. I want to do something else. But that is real human emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to not have some of that human emotion. But one, I have got to bring some perspective. Every writer must bring perspective to what they feel, or you just spew. And I don't want to spew. I want to craft, make. Art is when you make something. I want to craft something. But I don't want to just leave certain emotions on the cutting floor, and I can only take these two down the road, and I have to cut these away because I'm supposed to not have them. No, I want to use all of those in whatever mix that I'm making, whatever I'm doing. So it takes me time. I'm a slow tortoise-like poet. I don't write fast at all. I have to take my walks like I did when I was a girl. I have to process. I have to find the beautiful image in the thing. I have to find the beautiful language. I have to remember the raw emotion in it. And it's like anything, it bakes, it steeps, and you make something over time. I make something over time. And I'm trying to communicate something. I'm not trying to indict anybody. I'm not trying to throw, cream puff pies or worse. I want to have a conversation with whoever's listening. I really believe that as human beings, that's what art does. Art gives you something and you walk out of here with something in your pocket, or you don't. I want you to have something, in your pocket when you leave.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'll make a comment here about something that you both mentioned, how your grandparents affected you. But this actually happened to me in the last 2 weeks. Both my grandfathers had died before I was born. And all of a sudden I'm writing my own memoir. And but all of a sudden I never missed them. And I called my brother up and asked him, did you miss the fact that we didn't have our grandfathers? And I said, all of a sudden, no, I miss them. I realize now that I have grandchildren. I wished what I could have, that they could, because I tell them about their parents and this and that. And all of a sudden, he said to me, I've been thinking about that lately too.
Wow.
I think it's a very interesting way to look
That's
at it.
amazing.
Yeah. I think one thing that's really clear from what you just said is that just because somebody's dead, it doesn't mean the relationship doesn't keep developing and changing.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So.
Yes, miss.
You mentioned that you have been writing since you were a child, just taking notes. I've done the same thing, probably not as much as you though, but I always daydream and say when I'm 80 and I don't have to do all these things, I'm going to start reading all of that. Now, have you ever gone back to read when you were young?
Oh, every day.
Or is it still?
No. These aren't just dream boxes.
Okay.
This is a canvas.
Okay.
I pull from those journals to this day. I never know what a book is going to be about. I never know the poem I'm going to work on. But I have a shelf of data and research and material that I could go, and I can still access some of that emotive, that Tennessee Williams talks about, the emotional terrain. I can still access it. And it's not, I'll say this one last thing. You will never have time to write. Never. You will never have time to write. Once I understood that I had to make time, you have to prioritize it. You have to get up in the morning or whenever you can do it, but you will never have time to write.
That's brilliant. It's true. I was feeling very uncharitable toward another writer recently because I said, oh, that person has more time. And I thought, no, actually they have more will.
Actually, my dirty secret is that Nikki's absolutely right, but also, for me, writing is the most pleasurable thing I can do all day. So for me, it's not so much discipline as I want to be as, Protestant as everybody else in it, but it's really pleasure.
In it. You have to be in it.
I want to be inside it,
Yes.
When you're inside it,
Yes.
you're making
do.
something and you're not anxious or all the things that you could be distracted, all those things. Elizabeth Bishop says it about perfectly useless something, concentration. Perfectly useless concentration. It's just a
Right.
wonderful way to feel about it.
Or Marion Moyster was, I too just like poetry. I too
You
just
just
like
like it, yeah, right,
There are more important things.
yeah.
I want to thank you both so much for being so brave and good and showing us who you are. Thank you.